December 30th, 1916, St. Petersburg. The Neva River is a sheet of black ice, a frozen scar cutting through the heart of the Russian capital. Two police officers, drawn by a dark stain near the Petrovsky Bridge, begin to chip away at the ice. What they pull from the frigid water is not merely a body. It is a nightmare. The corpse is grotesque, frozen solid. The face is a pulp of battered flesh and matted bloody hair. One eye has been gouged out. The body is riddled with bullet holes. But the most horrifying detail is found in the lungs. They are full of water. This man was beaten, poisoned, and shot multiple times. And after all that, he was still alive when he was thrown into the river. He had died finally by drowning under the ice. This was not a random street crime. The victim was Grigori Rasputin. And his killers were not Bolshevik revolutionaries or German spies. They were the very heart of the Russian nobility. Prince Felix Yusupov, the wealthiest man in the empire, and the Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, the Tsar's own cousin. How does one man, a semi-literate peasant from the frozen wastes of Siberia, inspire such homicidal terror in the highest echelons of power? How does he become so indestructible that his death becomes a legend of dark magic? History remembers him as the Mad Monk, a debauched mystic who hypnotized the Tsarina and brought a 300-year-old dynasty to its knees. But that story is a lie, a comfortable myth to hide a far more terrifying truth. The truth is not about sex or Satanism. It's about a desperate mother, a dying child, and the catastrophic power of a single devastating secret. To understand how this peasant ruled Russia, you must first understand the wound he was brought in to heal. This wound wasn't on a battlefield. It was hidden in the royal nursery, a secret that would bring an empire to its knees. So, what was this fatal vulnerability? In 1904, the Romanov dynasty was at the zenith of its power. Tsar Nicholas II ruled 1/6 of the world's landmass as a divine autocrat. He was, by all accounts, a gentle family man. His wife, Tsarina Alexandra, was a granddaughter of Queen Victoria of England. They were the most powerful couple on earth. And in that year, God granted them their deepest wish, a son. Alexei Nikolaevich, the Tsarevich, the heir to the throne. The celebration was boundless, but within weeks, the joy turned to ice-cold terror. The baby, barely a month old, had a bleeding episode from his navel. It wouldn't stop. The finest doctors in the empire were summoned. They watched helpless as the heir to all of Russia nearly bled to death from a scratch. Tsarina Alexandra had passed on the royal disease, the curse of Queen Victoria, hemophilia B, a genetic mutation that prevents blood from clotting. For young Alexei, any bump, any fall, any bruise could trigger a catastrophic internal hemorrhage. His joints would swell with blood, causing agonizing, crippling pain. The palace became a prison. The heir was a state secret. His illness was hidden from the Russian people, from the court, even from the extended family. Nicholas and Alexandra became recluses, isolated by their grief and terror. The doctors were powerless. The priests were useless. The Tsar, who commanded millions, could not save his only son. This is the key. Alexandra, a woman of intense, almost hysterical religious fervor, descended into a desperate spiral of mysticism. She prayed not just for her son, but for a miracle, for a holy man, Asteritz, a man of God who could do what medicine and royalty could not. The stage was set, the wound was open, and from the depths of Siberia a man was coming to fill the void. But Russia was full of mystics. How did this one coarse, unwashed peasant find a pathway from a frozen wasteland directly to the private chambers of the Tsarina? Who was Grigori Rasputin? He was not a mad monk. He was not even a monk. He was a peasant, born in 1869 in the remote village of Pokrovskoye. He was a husband and a father. He was semi-literate, coarse, and possessed a wild, magnetic energy. In his late 20s, he had a religious conversion and became a stranik, a holy wanderer. He walked thousands of miles living on charity, praying at monasteries. He developed a reputation as a starets, a holy elder, a man who had acquired spiritual insight. His doctrine was simple and dangerously appealing. God could be found not through formal church ritual, but through sin. One must sin, repent with abandon, and in that ecstatic repentance, one would find grace. For the bored, spiritually empty aristocrats of St. Petersburg, this holy devil was intoxicating. He was not a nobody who wandered in off the street. He was introduced to the highest society by the black princesses Militsa and Anastasia of Montenegro, members of the extended royal family obsessed with the occult. They presented him to the desperate Tsarina as a true man of God. On November 1st, 1905, Rasputin met Nicholas in Alexandria. He was rough, he smelled of the earth, and he spoke with absolute terrifying conviction. The Tsarina, desperate, was captivated. For 2 years, Rasputin was just one of many mystics, but in 1907 the moment arrived. The Tsarevich Alexei, 8 years old, suffered a severe fall. He was bleeding internally. The doctors at the imperial palace at Tsarskoye Selo gave up. They told the Tsarina to prepare for her son's death. The last rites were administered. In total despair, Alexandra sent a carriage for Rasputin. He was brought to the palace. He walked into the child's room, past the gilded furniture and the baffled physicians. He approached the bed, made the sign of the cross, and looked at the pale, dying boy. Accounts say he did not touch him. He simply stood at the foot of the bed and prayed. He spoke to the boy calmly. "Your pain is going away," he said. "You will not die. Sleep." He then turned to the hysterical Tsarina and said, "Do not grieve. The little one will not die." The next morning the bleeding had stopped. Alexei was pale, but his fever was gone. He was alive. To Alexandra this was not medicine. This was divine intervention. A miracle. How did he do it? Historians and scientists have debated this for a century. Rasputin held no magic, but he held 3 powerful practical tools. First, the power of calm. Rasputin's serene, confident presence had a profound hypnotic, calming effect on the hysterical Alexandra. Her calmness in turn calmed the child. Lowered stress means lowered blood pressure, which is critical for a haemophiliac. Second, and most critically, the doctors of the day were prescribing a new wonder drug for pain, aspirin. We now know that aspirin is a powerful blood thinner. The doctors were inadvertently killing the child. Rasputin, a peasant, distrusted all medicine. His first command was always, throw away the potions. Let God do his work. By simply stopping the aspirin, Rasputin allowed the boy's body to form a clot. Finally, there was his undeniable raw hypnotic charisma. He convinced the boy he would live, but the how didn't matter to the Tsarina. All that mattered was the result. From that day on, Grigori Rasputin was not just a friend. He was our friend, the holy man, the only protector of the Russian heir. His power within the palace was absolute, and he was about to cash in. But how does a healer, a holy man, transform into a political tyrant? How does a grip on a mother's heart become a grip on an entire empire's throat? Rasputin's grip on the Tsarina was simple and total. If our friend is here, Alexei will live. If he is not, Alexei will die. He had become the living insurance policy for the dynasty. For years, his influence was limited to personal matters. But in 1914, the world exploded. World War I began. This was the moment Rasputin transformed from a mystic healer into the most powerful man in Russia. In 1915, against the advice of all his ministers, Tsar Nicholas II made a catastrophic decision. He would leave St. Petersburg to take personal command of the army at the front. He left the capital and the day-to-day rule of the entire Russian Empire in the hands of his wife, Tsarina Alexandra, a woman who hated politics, a woman who was paranoid, and a woman who, by her own admission, would not make a single major decision without first consulting our friend. From the front, Nicholas wrote to his wife, "Do not think I'm angry that you write to me so much about Rasputin. On the contrary, I am glad to see your firm faith in the man of God." And so it began. Rasputin, the peasant, was now the shadow Tsar. His chambers became the real seat of government. Ambitious politicians, corrupt officials, and desperate aristocrats flocked to him, begging for favors. He began appointing and firing government ministers at will. This became known as the ministerial leapfrog. In 1 year, Russia went through 4 prime ministers, 5 ministers of the interior, and 3 ministers of war. Competent men were dismissed because Rasputin had a bad feeling about them. Incompetent, corrupt cronies were appointed because they paid him a bribe or flattered him. He openly boasted of his power. He would allegedly tell his drinking companions, "I just appointed a new minister today." He even interfered in military strategy, sending rambling, incoherent telegrams to the Tsar at the front, claiming he had visions of where the army should attack. The entire government was paralyzed. The country was bleeding to death in the war. The economy was collapsing. People were starving in the cities. And the empire was being run by a holy fool and a hysterical Tsarina. This is the real reason the Russian nobility hated him. The rumors of his debauchery, that he was sleeping with the Tsarina and her daughters, were largely propaganda, spread by the aristocracy themselves to discredit him. Their true horror was not that he was mad or immoral. Their true horror was that a muzhik, a peasant, a dark, unwashed member of the lower classes, was telling them, princes, dukes and counts, what to do. He had broken the sacred social order. He was living proof that the Tsar and Tsarina were incompetent, and that the entire autocracy was a sham. The Tsar's own family pleaded with him. His mother, the Dowager Empress, confronted him. "This cannot go on," she warned. Nicholas, weak-willed and trapped, refused to act. "Better one Rasputin," he said, "than 10 scenes of hysteria from the Empress." The government was powerless, the Tsar was weak, the Tsarina was blind, the army was losing, the people were starving. To the aristocracy it became sickeningly clear. The only way to save Russia, to save the monarchy itself, was to cut out the cancer. If the Tsar would not remove Rasputin, they would. They weren't just killing a man, they were trying to kill a symbol of their own humiliation, and they were about to turn a peasant into an immortal legend. We now return to that frozen night in December 1916. Prince Felix Yusupov, a man of immense wealth and dubious morals, lured Rasputin to his Moika palace. The story Yusupov told is the one that became legend. He claimed they fed Rasputin cakes and Madeira wine laced with enough potassium cyanide to kill 5 men. Rasputin ate and drank, and nothing happened. He complained the wine was sweet and asked for music. Panicked, Yusupov ran upstairs, grabbed a revolver, came back, and shot Rasputin in the chest. The mad monk collapsed. The conspirators celebrated, but when Yusupov went to check the body, the corpse allegedly leaped up, roaring, and grabbed him by the throat. Rasputin, with a bullet in him, staggered out into the palace courtyard, screaming that he would tell the Tsarina everything. Another conspirator, Vladimir Purishkevich, fired 4 more times. 1 shot missed, 1 hit his back, 1 hit his shoulder. The final shot, the one that truly stopped him, entered his head. Even then they were terrified. They beat the body with a club, wrapped it in a curtain, drove it to the Petrovsky Bridge, and dumped it into a hole in the ice. This is the legend. The man who could not be killed. The devil who defied poison and bullets. The reality, as revealed by the autopsy, was far less supernatural. There was no poison found in Rasputin's stomach. It's likely the conspirators, in their panic, either faked the poisoning or the cyanide was inert. He was shot, but the first shot to the chest, while serious, was not instantly fatal. He was indeed shot again in the back and fatally in the head. And yes, the autopsy confirmed his lungs were full of water. He was still breathing when he hit the Neva. The man wasn't supernatural. He was just incredibly stubbornly tough. But the legend of his indestructibility was more powerful than the truth. It was the perfect, terrifying capstone to his life. But did killing Rasputin save Russia? The conspirators were hailed as heroes. The Tsarina, broken by the murder of our friend, sank into a final catatonic grief. The Tsar, isolated and lost, was weaker than ever. A famous prophecy, allegedly from a letter Rasputin wrote to the Tsar before his death, declared, "If I am killed by common assassins, you, Tsar of Russia, will have nothing to fear. But if I am murdered by boyars, by nobles, their hands will remain stained with my blood for 25 years. You will be killed by the Russian people." The letter was almost certainly a forgery, created after the fact. But it was right. Rasputin's murder didn't save the monarchy. It was its death knell. It proved to the entire world that the Romanov dynasty was so weak, so rotted from within, that its own family had resorted to gangster-style murder in the cellars of their palaces. Less than 3 months after Rasputin's body was pulled from the ice, the Russian Revolution began. The Tsar was forced to abdicate. And just as the prophecy foretold, within 2 years, Nicholas, Alexandra and their children, including the boy whose sickness started it all, were huddled in another cellar in a town called Yekaterinburg, facing a Bolshevik firing squad. So did Rasputin really destroy Russia? No. That is the final brutal truth. Grigori Rasputin was not the cause of the Russian Revolution. He was a symptom. He was the human manifestation of a dynasty's decay. He was a mirror reflecting the fatal combination of Nicholas's incompetence, Alexandra's hysterical desperation, and the aristocracy's own corruption. A healthy, strong, and confident state could never have been threatened by a single charismatic peasant. But the Romanovs' Russia was already dying. Rasputin simply exposed the rot. He showed the world that the palace was hollow, that the autocracy was a corpse, and that the mad monk was, in the end, the only one with any real power. He was not the poison that killed the empire. He was simply the last, most bizarre and most terrifying omen of its inevitable, violent and bloody death.